We are here today with internationally acclaimed master performer and teacher, Ann Schein. Ann, welcome.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be with you.
It's a delight to have you on campus again.
Thank you.
And with Dr. Li-Shan, who is the chair of the piano area at Biola University's Conservatory of Music and a former student of Ms. Schein's.
Much beloved all the way around.
A little background about Ms. Schein. She made her debut at the age of 18 in Mexico City when she performed both Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto and Tchaikovsky's B-flat minor concerto in the same program.
No, it was 1 week apart. I can't claim doing the two in one program. No.
Okay. She has performed at the White House and with the London Symphony, the BBC Orchestra, the New York Philharmonic, the Philadelphia Orchestra, and other major orchestras around the world. Very impressive. She was on the faculty at the Peabody Conservatory of Music from 1980 until 2001. I actually auditioned at Peabody in 1983, and I knew about you then. Yes, and you were sitting, I played the Mephisto Waltz. It was probably very memorable 30 years ago. Yeah,
oh my word,
yeah.
That's exciting. I love to hear that.
So I knew about you at that point, definitely. And you have also served as an artist faculty member at the Aspen School since 1984.
That's right.
A very high caliber summer program, maybe the highest in the United States.
It's very exciting. Yeah. I value that tremendously.
A recent book written by the music critic from the Washington Post, author and musicologist Cecilia Hopkins Porter, entitled 5 Lives in Music: Women Performers, Composers, and Impresarios, from the Baroque to the present time. So quite a span of time. Well, she features Ann Schein as the 20th century artist.
That makes me go red in the face, but it was her choice for her reasons.
It's very impressive. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
And to begin our questions, perhaps you could talk a little bit about your teachers.
Yes, I would love
You
to
studied
do that.
with Mieczysław Munz,
Yes.
and with Anton Rubinstein, who we all admire, continue to admire in his recordings, and Myra Hess as well. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about those teachers.
And I would like to talk about my very first teacher and my parents, who were responsible really for those two choices. Because my mother was a violinist. She didn't pursue a career, but she was a beautiful musician. My sister, 5 years older, played the violin. But the fact is, I never went near that instrument. It did not attract me in any way. And post-war years and during the war, as those people in the generation that went through that remember, the radios were on in the homes across the United States and across Europe, and the radio was never off. And of course there were wonderful speeches, there were wonderful people who were giving the news, but it was quite frightening. And I didn't understand anything that was being said, but I did listen to the music that was being played, patriotic songs, and that's what inspired me. I was 3 when I went to the piano and imitated with 2 hands the Marine hymn. That was my first piece I ever played.
I think I had that as a kid too. I remember playing that.
That's right.
Yeah.
So my very alert and extraordinary parents, she's got to have a teacher. We don't want a little monkey who's imitating everything. She's got to learn to read music, and we want the very finest teacher if this is going to be a real talent to develop. So they knew, they were in Chicago at that time, and they knew Dr. Glenn Dillard Gunn and his wife, who were very well known in the great arts culture of Chicago at that time. They had maybe one of the finest operas in the country, and some of Liszt's great pupils settled there, great teachers, great sense of tradition of the piano. So my parents had me play for them, And then Dr. Gunn was called to be the main music critic in Washington, D.C. And we also moved to Washington post-war. So from the age of 4, for 9 years, I studied mainly with Mrs. Gunn because I think I was a bit frightened of him. I was so small, and he was rather fierce looking. He was American. They were both American born, but European trained. Both studied piano with Bozzoni, and also the Arthur Friedheim, who was one of Liszt's great pupils. So they had a sense of real piano art. And I think my parents did a great thing to choose them for me. And in Washington, where I grew up, there was post-war every single one of the great artists that we can think of, not just pianists, violinists, singers, orchestras, the great ones that are not here anymore. And that's one of my great sorrows and also inspirations, because I was able every week to hear, not just once, but the audiences at that time wanted to hear them every year. So each season we were filled with great art from these artists. And I think that's one of the real regrets today for students, that we can't take them to these concerts. Of course, we have all the technology to hear them. It's not quite the same as having your life changed listening to them. So that was, my first 9 years was very crucial in my development, because they could see that performing for me, which they had me do every year in Mrs. Gunn's studio, it was nothing fancy, was something that I enjoyed doing and was part of the gift. She also gave me very difficult repertoire without telling me it was difficult. And for instance, I was given, they loved Debussy and Ravel in the French music. I think the extraordinary art of pedaling is very crucial in that repertoire. They knew all the great artists of the day, especially the pianists. And this was a feature. I think I was given a tremendous amount of literature where that was a feature of the pedaling. And I don't think they indicated too much verbally. They just gave me the music where I would have to use the pedal. And when I started, I was very tiny, so I had one of those boxes, you know, for pedaling, but it was always a feature. And Dr. Gunn wrote a beautiful review of one of these small little recitals that I gave in the Washington Post, and said she seems to understand the art of artistic pedaling. And I don't remember conversing about it or great conversations about it. So they started me on a great journey. Then I went to Interlaken, 2 summers, music camp, and a part of their summer camp tradition is a competition. And the first time I entered the competition with Beethoven No. 1, which was my first concerto, the Gunns gave me that. Nothing happened, but I didn't care one way or the other. It just was something you did, you know. Second summer, they gave me MacDowell D minor concerto, and I went to Interlaken because they knew the MacDowells. They knew all these great new American composers and the artists. And they surrounded me with conversation about them. So I was surrounded by the aura of real art and the big artists that came. Novaes was a great friend and a favorite. And Teresa Carreño had been a friend when she was alive and playing. Anyway, I won the concerto competition that summer of 1953. And my parents, again, put their heads together. I had been 9 years with this wonderful aging couple, and they felt that must be a sign that we find an artist teacher to carry forward this development. And they chose 3, extraordinary 3. Only certain parents with knowledge of the piano and the tradition and the greatness One was Mieczysław Horzowski, who taught at Curtis. Another was Edward Steuermann, who taught at Juilliard.
These are all very famous names.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Mieczysław Munz, who taught at Peabody. And they were definitely willing, if any would take me, to send me to New York or Philadelphia or Baltimore. Well, Edward Steuermann was a scary man. He had studied with Schoenberg, and he was a tough German temperament. And I remember him saying to my mother, I don't remember what I played or how, probably really not well. He said, Mrs. Schein, I think you have to get her off the piano. That isn't her thing. So my mother was very gracious and said, thank you very much for listening. She was wonderful. She didn't flinch. And then we went, and I played for Horzowski, and I fell in love with him. This elderly man, like a kind of grandfather, you know. And he said, your daughter's very young, but I have a full class, but bring her next year, and I think it would be really interesting to guide her. So then we went to Peabody. And I played for Reginald Stewart, who was the director at that time. Tall Scotsman. And I don't know again how I played or what I played, but he said immediately, across the hall is exactly the right teacher for your daughter. Would you like to meet him? And you know where it is. On the second floor, where all the offices were across, was his studio, and he was there. And I was absolutely dazzled by this elegant European man who kissed my mother's hand, but there was something quivering about him in sensitivity and these bright eyes, and could you play something for me? And he accepted me at that time, and we decided that was it. We wouldn't think again about anyone else. But I didn't know what was in store for me. Here was a great, great giant of the piano, one of the golden age of the virtuoso, who, because of tragedies in the war, couldn't play anymore. He had to teach. And I would say he was not a natural lover of teaching. It was in his life. Reginald Stewart had played, he had played with Reginald Stewart, who was a conductor, over 20 times in Toronto. So they knew each other very well. And Munz had suffered incredible things during the war. He was in this country on a concert tour when Hitler invaded Poland. And he lost 23 members of his family, including parents. And then more to the story, Munz's nerves just completely collapsed. So he couldn't perform, and it was Reginald Stewart that said to him, come to Peabody, and I'll take care of you. You can teach, and you can gradually recover from this onslaught of terrible things. And that's how, in 1953, my mother brought me there. And I think it was a miracle. But it was my parents, again, who found these three great, great pianists. And when he took me, I was still going to school in Washington, which my parents believed in. They did not want to see me go and be enveloped by a conservatory. They wanted a normal life for me. So they worked out a schedule. 2-hour lessons twice a week, and my mother would drive back and forth from Washington and bring me back to school.
How long of a drive
Junior high
was
school,
that?
hour and a half, twice a week. And he would give me at least 2 hours twice a week. And he said after just a couple of weeks to my parents, I would like to ask a favor of you. I really feel that there may be a long life in music ahead for your daughter, but I need your permission for 3 to 5 years of training, bringing her from a good level where she is to one where she could sustain a major career. And of course they just were besotted by him, and they loved his playing. They had heard his playing for years. He was a great poet, a great, very sensitive, subtle artist, and he praised the ease of the body and the ease of the virtuosity. It was Menahem Pressler that taught me what the word really meant, because he asked a class one time, and I heard him say, "What's the meaning of the word virtuosity?" And everybody said, "Speed, you know, fiery playing." "No," he said, "the word virtue in Latin means ease." And that was Munz. He took pride, and he watched like a hawk all his students, that they would not have undue tension. To that I owe, and plus the 3 to 5 years, which I didn't know what was in store for me. It was every summer in Mexico City, where he took his vacations, he asked my family to come there so he could give me a lesson every day. Well, that lasted 6 to 8 hours. Taught me how really to practice. I bit the piano when he left every day, but he came back the next morning. And it was training, 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 and repertoire. Always more difficult repertoire. I think I'm here today because of all of that. Not just him, it was everything. He said when I came to my parents, "I don't see problems. I want to take it from there. There's nothing I'm going to redo." So that was a tribute to what had come before. So anyway, those are the early ones. Then later came the coaching from, yes, Arthur Rubinstein and Myra Hess, my idols from my childhood. They had played on the stage of Constitution Hall every year. And I fell in love with them both, never thinking my path would ever cross theirs personally.
You mentioned Rubinstein and Hess, and I've listened to Rubinstein recordings for years, but I don't know Hess's playing. Were they different in approach? Yes. What was their sound difference
the
in sound?
Not so different. Hers was also a golden, rich sound, but he was into more overt excitement in it, in a way. I mean, he played for his audience with his whole heart. And in his youth, he was known for just completely raising, not as a virtuoso, but emotionally raising the roof, and with this utterly golden sound of his. When he was asked, "Where did you get this sound of yours?" he would right away say, "From singers." I knew many great singers, and I wanted them to stand, and I had them stand often next to me and sing. And I wanted to know how they made their sound. So that was the immediate reaction where he had it. But of course, we know that everyone should have their own sound. Comes through each individual. There isn't a blanket sound for everybody everybody.
When you worked with him, did he work on lyrical sound with you? Did he share some of those ideas that he picked up from singers?
Way, but through repertoire. He gave me quite a severe reaction. The first work I played for him, because Munz wanted me to play Schumann for him. And I played the humoresque. And he seemed really very moved by the piece. So the next day he said, "Come back, I want you to play also for my wife. I want her to hear this piece." One of the more elusive works of Schumann. So then the lessons got going, again twice a week, half a day. And pretty soon he said to me, "You understand how to play Schumann, but not quite yet how to play Chopin." And boy, was that a shock. Because I had had a huge amount of repertoire, and I'd had Mieczysław Munz, born in Krakow, Poland, teach me.
Was this before your recordings?
Oh, no.
With your work with Rubinstein? This was after your recordings?
Well, it was the third Rachmaninoff in Vienna, that recording that came to Rubinstein.
Oh, okay.
It was given to him by one of his childhood Polish friends, who put it on his record player. "I don't want to hear another Prodigy. Take it off," he said. But this friend was such a close, lifelong friend that she just turned around and put it back on. And it was a party at Easter, and the story was that he made everybody be quiet for 45 minutes and listen to the whole thing. "Who is it? And where is she in Washington, D.C.? tell her to come to New York. And who did she study with? Now, that's another story I don't need to go into, but Mieczysław Munz, bring him too. So we had to go to the Plaza Hotel, and Munz had a huge glass of scotch because this was an encounter he never expected to have.
So they didn't know one another before
They
that?
did, but in a dramatic way.
Oh.
Munz had been married to Nella first, and she left Munz for Rubinstein
Oh my goodness.
at a certain point.
And yet he still came to meet with him.
And they had never seen each other since that time. So this was a drama. But I played some Schumann and I played some Chopin mazurkas. And then he wanted to hear some more repertoire. So that's how I started with him. But when he said that to me, I had no idea what he meant at all. But I had 2 full summers with him. He went through the F minor concerto. I get goosebumps today. I still can't believe he played it with me in his living room on the other second piano. All the preludes, both sonatas, all the ballades. That I think of the 4th ballade. He said, "You have to convince me." He didn't tell me what to do. What he did in the concerto was a revelation, because, as I described Munz, he loved the ease and the flying speeds of things. Rubinstein said, "What are you doing? These are vocal lines. It's bel canto. You can't do that. We can't hear it." And therein lies a secret to his sound, because there was never a superfluous sound from Rubinstein at all. So he transformed works that I had done. Mrs. Gunn had given me 16 of the preludes, including hard ones, before I went to Munz. So it had 3 layers of development there. And then a revelation from Rubinstein that I've thought about since then, every time I play. He said, "You know, this one's really from Italy. And here's another one from Italy. There's a good half a dozen or more that are Italian songs. I never heard that from anyone but him. And they really are. They're just uninhibited." And I thought after that, my goodness, here was George Sand bringing this sick man and her children down to the Mediterranean, across the Mediterranean to this island. He thought, "Oh, how beautiful this is." He must have heard some things, and he heard Italian opera.
Bellini was one of his favorite composers,
yes.
I believe, yeah.
So it was part of his soul, and that was another transformation in a lot of the preludes, and I don't get enough of it.
Oh, preludes are amazing.
I just love to think about
So from Rubinstein, did you take away that you need to sing everything, and how does that affect a piece like the Rachmaninoff 3rd Piano Concerto, where there's so much activity? Is it possible?
Well, he heard the recording. He really liked the recording. He completely gave the credit to Munz. And it's true, because in this development period of 3 to 5 years, the second year I was 14, Munz said to me, "I'm going to give you something you'll never play, but it's the perfect time to develop your hands." So he gives me the 3rd Rachmaninoff with these took me a year to get through. But another of his magic gifts was fingering. Fingering for each hand, facilitating passages so that they came out with ease. He was a magician. And I learned from other students that there could be a whole different set of fingerings for different hands. But he knew the result should be of ease. So this was a year of horrendous struggle, but I loved the piece. And one day he gave me Horowitz's recording. He said, "You have to hear this recording." And I don't know, it lit a fire under me. And a couple of months after that, he said, "How'd you like to play this with the Peabody Orchestra?" I said, "Great." Then I remembered he said I wouldn't play it. And I had 5 rehearsals. It's one of the only times I've ever had 5 rehearsals. And that was in my Mons period. In the cadenza, in the Peabody Concert Hall, was a sharp bang like a rifle shot. And I jumped, but I went on. So my mother came back afterward, tears streaming down her face and laughing at the same time. She said, "I'm glad you didn't stop. You heard that sound in the cadenza." I said, "Oh yes, what was it?" She said, "It was your teacher next to me who broke his wooden chair. He was so nervous." That's the only time he ever showed his nerves. But he had a lot of them to do this. He said, "I'm just squeezing a little bit more out of the lemon." He always pushed, always. But anyway, that's how it started.
Do you hear your teacher's words coming out of your mouth when you're teaching? Or concepts that were used? Or what was their influence?
Mons was a man of few words. He was very modest. He was an artist.
Very meticulous, though, it sounds like.
In his playing, but heart-wrenching subtlety and poetry. He couldn't talk about music that way, and he didn't play. But in his aura, you picked it up. It was extraordinary because what he was allowing you is your own voice. Never did he dictate any interpretation at all. It was the way he was, and his trust in you, and the sheer nerve. When I played my debut in Carnegie Hall, that was Rubinstein at that time who was encouraging all of this. Of course, you must, he said, play Schumann. And then we planned the rest of the program, some Chopin and Kabalevsky Third Sonata. So what are you going to open with? Well, I said, I've heard Myra Hess play Les Adieux many times, and I think that piece is the most beautiful thing in the world. Could I open with it? Now, how does a teacher feel where you've never started a work, but for your debut in Carnegie Hall, you're going to start the program? He said, it's fine. And that's what I did. It's that kind of nerve and trust and confidence. Of course, I must have displeased him. Rubinstein said, you have to convince me. Because he didn't dictate anything, really, except this work with the Chopin, which was not sound. It was the aura of the Italian bel canto. And, of course, his own sound was in my ear. But it's this kind of nurturing of your own individuality, which is a subtle art.
So would he say, I'm not convinced, and then you would go back to the
Rubinstein, my
practice
knees are
room
going to shake.
Yeah.
Now, they shook all the time.
Huh.
I played the fourth ballade. He said, okay, my knees are going. And he jumped up and he started running around the room. Now, this man had many talents. One of them was as an actor. And his friends would love to have him sit there and make faces for them at a party. He was of course, one son of his, John, is an extraordinary actor, but he was the actor. And he ran around, and I never took my eyes off of him nor stopped playing because the expressions changed like a painting on his face. And when I finished, he came up to me, and he always was smoking a cigar, this big smile that just about killed your heart. He said, I knew you had it in you. So that's how he did it, is to convince me. You can't imitate me, don't try. I don't want to be a teacher. Don't bring me any techniques like Liszt that way, you know. Just make music, and if I'm not convinced. So he transformed things in that way, and he made you want to run to the piano. Never a moment of intimidation or something that might just make you give less. You wanted to give everything. One time he got very angry, the only time, because it took me 2 hours to get to his house from where I lived, and it was raining and I was a wreck. And I felt I didn't play well. And I was really about in tears, and I said, I could have played better than this. I'm so sorry. And he got up, he was furious. I never want to hear that again. Don't ever say that you can't be better. We can always be better. It's not the right thing to play. He was really mad at me. I haven't forgotten that.
Attitude.
And courage, and you're stronger than the weather. How dare you let rain influence you like that? We're stronger than that. It was a uplift all the time.
He was also a pianist with tremendous ease in his playing.
Relaxed,
yeah,
weight.
Yeah.
And what was part of the sound was the relaxation.
Yeah, just tremendous.
But also the aristocratic.
Yeah, the elegance.
And the brain of an intellect where that was not obviously foremost, but it was, you know, the whole of our work came out with no fuss.
Did you always see yourself as a teacher also? Or you had great success as a performer, but you chose then to teach as well. Some just perform. But,
I didn't choose.
Okay.
It came to me
Oh.
in the most beautiful way. One of Mieczysław Munz's finest pupils, who's now 94, Walter Hautzig, who had studied also with Schnabel and with Munz. Those were two opposite camps there.
Schnabel and Munz.
Yes, both of those. Called when Munz had passed away. Said, there's a part-time job open. He was teaching at Peabody. I think he was there 26 years. I want you to come try for this job. I said, how can I do that? I've never taught before. He said, come try for the job. It happened that the director was Elliot Galkin at that time. He taught composition, he taught criticism at Peabody, and he conducted. And I played my first Tchaikovsky B-flat with him conducting at Peabody. And the dean was Irving Lowens, who was the music critic in Washington on the Star. He'd raised me, writing about things that I did in the city. So I was very lucky. There was no audition at all, and they wanted me for that part-time job with 3 students. So that was a privilege to be asked to do that. I said, of course. Mr. Galkin said, do you need all stars? I said, what's that? I haven't done any teaching. Well, I think you'll enjoy it, he said. It only took 1 student, because I didn't know the answer to that. Would I like it? Yes, I'd been playing from the age of teenage, and I loved to play, and I loved to travel. Teaching, I didn't know until only took 1 student. There was this tall boy who looked like Van Cliburn from Texas, 3rd scherzo of Chopin, music on the piano, good hands. Now what? And it was like magic. It started. It took layers of experience because really, I think we'd all agree it's work with people, number 1. And that takes experience with different personalities and different hands and different bodies and different dreams and different wishes. I mean, we all know about that. But the longer you do it, and then the next year I had 10, and the next year I had 16. So it went from there, but I knew from that first student that this was something extraordinary. So it worked. And then 2 letters that were written for me in recommendation for that job. One from Beveridge Webster, one from Menahem Pressler. And Menahem said, now all these things that you have felt as you play, you've got to know how to talk about them and articulate them to your students. So, but they're not all like Li-Shan. That goes in a special category. There's only just a few ever at the high enough level that is so challenging and so beautiful, because their music morphs, doesn't it, into an infinite amount of possibility. It's like the preludes. I mean, there's no end. And then the ones that go very high make you go, you know, as high as you can go to guide without dictating. But it's become almost a missionary thing with me because of our culture these days and the future. How difficult it is compared to post-war, where it was quite predictable. We had LPs, we had concerts every week with the orchestras and the soloists. We heard live concerts. There was a predictable thing. Of course, there were competitions and careers and managers, and the dreams might have been similar to now, but our culture is not. It's coarsened. And I find, since I retired with my husband from Peabody, almost, I have to think, it was 84, I think, I've been doing teaching in a masterclass situation all over. So in Aspen, this last summer, there were 28 nationalities represented in the students there, 800 students. So you get a wider spectrum of what's happening today with our technology and all the distractions and the careers that are made, you don't know how, but the audiences have changed. They want to be entertained. They're maybe not happy when the same person comes next year. It's true. I've experienced that. I've been places where I love to be. No, they want another name. They want another young competition winner. Careers can be made in the media. That never happened before. It's word of mouth, yes, is powerful, but so how do they look to the future is the thing. How much, where do they have confidence? Who's their team in life? Family, teachers, husbands, whoever. You have to have that support with music to have confidence for the future. And I'm not a great fan of competitions, but I judge a lot of them. And mostly, my most precious work is those that do not win. How to explain to them that they have not failed, that they're the same 5 seconds before they go on that stage as when they come off, and it's really going to be okay. Many aspects of the future for students today that is much more, I would say, scary in a way, unknown. The world is kind of topsy-turvy. So those are thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. You are a person of faith, and you were able to hold together a performance career and a teaching life and a family all together, which just amazes me. I recall Li-Shan telling me about how you are a person of unending energy. But how has your faith played into holding all of those aspects of your life together?
Well, as I shared with Li-Shan, and I've shared with you about my family, I was raised by extraordinary parents. And I can tell you that they came to Christian Science through much illness in my father's family. And my mother's mother was healed in Christian Science. So she was an Episcopalian, and my father from a Jewish family, but 8 children and a lot of tuberculosis and strokes, really bad health in that family. And when they married, they came into Christian Science. So I'm the 4th child, and that's all I knew for 23 years. And I can tell you that is, if given good health, that is one of the most beautiful foundations for life. My mother became, and always was, but became my best friend. She was like a rock of Gibraltar. And she traveled with me the first 5 years of my playing. And then one day she said, I think it's time I lose my job now. And that's how she told me she thought I could do everything myself. But she was an unbelievable person. When I lost her, because as many people, many know about Christian Science, she did not go to a doctor. And she passed away at 56, very young. And my life shattered. My father had passed away the same year. And it just happened that the Lord brought Earl into my life exactly just before that time. And that's how that's a cute story, how we got to meet each other. But he said, I can't deal with this if you continue with your faith you've had, because his faith was different. And I told him that I'd lost both my parents and I was currently shattered, and that God brought him at the right moment to me, which is absolutely true. We have no idea really how this came about, except it came about through sheer miraculous power of God at that moment. And then I didn't know much about his father. Was a minister who had come from Sweden to the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And knowing no English, it was a beautiful story. His dad wrote a book, By Faith. And they never, ever forced me into their, I would say it's an enormous faith that family had. God was going to provide. And then they had 2 out of 3 sons who were musical. And the mother had studied with a pupil of Franz Liszt in Chicago and was a phenomenal pianist. But she made the decision to marry Earl's dad and become a mother and a wife. No career. And of course she was a pent-up volcano of emotion, but she knew exactly what to do with these 2 boys. And Earl's brother became timpanist in the Philadelphia Orchestra with Ormandy in his early 20s. And Earl, after Juilliard, first concertmaster of the New York City Ballet, and his mother was very disappointed because he was playing in the pit, and he should be up on a stage. And when he joined the quartet when he was 26, he should be first violin, you know. She was quite a personality, but musician. And the boys had the best training in the world. So here I am meeting Earl at that moment. And I began to go to church. Calvary Baptist Church in New York was where the students who were Christian in Juilliard mostly went, Redeemer, Presbyterian, and Calvary. So we began to go there, and we went to hear Norman Vincent Peale. I remember, I adored him. That was quite close to my Christian Science background. But no one in his family ever, in fact, his mother said she had been healed of a stomach tumor early. She empathized with my background. So no one pushed me in any direction. But it just went. And when I had my girls, it was natural for me that we belonged to a church and that they are raised in the church. And the only disappointment my mother-in-law had was that we didn't have the children blessed as she had done in her life. But a faith stronger than Earl's parents you could not find. And Earl himself, he said the only thing more important to me before we married is my faith. And it was like a rock. So that was the beginning for me of it was in Missionary Alliance Church in White Plains. We lived in White Plains and Scarsdale area of Westchester that I was saved. And that was the pastor, Seconder, Dahl Seconder, and his incredible wife. And it went from there. Our older daughter was in the nursery school there and has come back to join a church where she lives in Worcester, Massachusetts. So it has grown, and then the joy of the first student who said, I hear you are a Christian. And that was the only English that student knew. That was it. But the body that I can look back on of tremendous faith among the students is awesome. So it is a glue, I guess that's a terrible word, but it's a glue that can hold lives together very much. God knows his plan for us. And he gives the music talent, so then we can't take credit for that. We just have our job to do. And I think my path, in a sense, I would not want it changed. Because another story that's not for today is how I came into my parents' family. I wouldn't have played the piano, I wouldn't have had any health. It came into as the fourth child of that family with a stability that was total. And that was part of the plan, I'm sure. And that's part of how I can answer that for you.
So can you share the story about you and Earl meeting and what the circumstances were there?
If you'd like to hear, because it's a funny story.
All the musicians who will be listening to this will probably be interested.
Now, I'd never met him, never seen him in my life. I didn't even know there was a new second violinist in the Juilliard String Quartet. But he was asked to join in 1966 and given 44 string quartets to learn in a few months because they were going to the Far East on a tour. Well, he said there was nothing to do but to kill myself learning those pieces, and they were wonderful with me. They knew that I would be a little shaky at first, but that I would be the right choice. So they went to the Far East. Now, at the same time, I had my first tour to the Far East, 1966. And everywhere I went to Korea, I went to Japan. The Juilliard String Quartet had been there a few weeks before. I thought, oh, that's interesting, you know. I'm following this great musical group. And in Hong Kong, I was there 2 weeks. And there was a wonderful lady who was the manager of all the artists who came, Maple Kwan, born in Canada. That's where her name came from. And after a few days of just meeting her, she said, my friends and I want to take you out to dinner because we have something to tell you. I just met her. So they did. They took me out to dinner. And afterwards she said, we're all absolutely sure that we know who you're going to marry. I said, well, who's that? You know, I was 26 and I had no intention of anybody I could think of. Well, that she said this second violinist. So I went on my tour and kind of thought it was very funny. Didn't think about it. Then in October, back in Washington, I had my closest friend was William Masellos. I don't know if you know that name, but he studied piano with Carl Friedberg, who was a great student of Clara Schumann, and he taught at Juilliard many, many years. Malcolm Frager was another one of his students. And Masellos had a double gift. He could play the Kreisleriana of Schumann to reduce you to tears. I mean, the same golden, gorgeous sound. And he had a gift for contemporary music. Copland wrote his fantasy for Bill Masellos. And the recording of his Concord Sonata has not been bettered until I can mention Jeremy Dank, who's the second one that is like he invents it on the stage. Anyway, Bill Masellos was teaching at Catholic University in Washington, and he called, he said, would you like to go to the Library of Congress with me because the Juilliard Quartet is playing with Aaron Copland? I thought, wow. And I'd been many times to concerts at the library. So I did. And I had not thought about the Hong Kong story until I saw the 4 men come out on stage. Now, 3 of them had dark hair, but there was one blonde, one Swedish blonde. And the lady in front of me had some binoculars. So I said, could I borrow your binoculars? And then we went to the party afterward, and I went with Bill Macellos, and he made some funny comment like, well, I had blonde hair when I was young, you know. He saw that I was interested in this, and that's where I met Earl, was the party. And I didn't know whether I should say anything to him, but what I ended up saying, I'm glad I did, because I wouldn't have met him otherwise, that I bring greetings from Maple Kwan in Hong Kong, and that's all I said. But that started the relationship.
That's a great story.
And it was not much at first, because the quartet had 120 plus concerts a year,
goodness.
plus teaching, plus the Library of Congress, plus enormous. And little by little, I was in Norway in 1969, Easter time, and I didn't have my parents. I didn't have a place to come home. And I had a wonderful manager who was like a surrogate mother, and she knew about Earl. I said, do you suppose I would have the nerve to call him and see if I could come and spend Easter with his family in White Plains? She pushed me to go. She also taught me a beautiful Norwegian sentence, Vi går i giftetanker. I hope I do that right. We're full of wedding thoughts. So that was Easter, and I stayed in their house in White Plains, and we were married May 24th, 1969. So that's my little funny
That's your
story.
story, yeah. Well, getting back to music,
Yes.
You are playing the Chopin Preludes, and you have recorded the Preludes, and you've performed them numerous times. What's it like returning to a set of pieces like the Preludes over and over again, and what do you mine out of them now that you didn't before? How's the experience different?
I go back to a conversation. Robert Sherman, his mother, Nadia Reisenberg, was one of our great 20th century pianists, but he had a radio program every day for 3 hours in New York, interviewed everybody. And he had Nathan Milstein on his show one day. He asked him, Maestro, you have played the Beethoven Concerto hundreds of times. What is your opinion about doing a work over? There's big silence. Mr. Sherman, you don't understand. It's like the loaves and fishes. There's no end to the revelations. To me, I just encourage everybody to get old like I am and play repertoire this long and find that there is no end. Every piano is different, every audience is different, every hall, every atmosphere is different. And teaching now, these years since '84, you get to be uninvolved physically yourself and hear the music coming at you. And this is unlimited. I've been teaching at Stony Brook this semester, teaching for one of my former students who had an illness. But wonderful kids. A general thing today, now I don't think that happens at Biola. This would not happen here. I've never experienced it. But as I teach, the students are not into books. They don't read about the composers. If they know anything, it's very little. And yet they play well. But those of us who've lived a long time, we know that the tradition isn't there, the style, the knowledge isn't quite deep enough. It's across the board. It's a shock. I don't know, because there's some fine teachers involved here, I haven't an answer to that, except it's consistent. I don't think here, and at Peabody, I don't think it happened, because we had teachers that were like hawks. And those who didn't speak English very well, they had to speak English well, and they had to have lists of books, and they had to know things. And I don't think Mr. Fleischer would ever have allowed such a thing. But it's pervasive today. I get my information or not from Wikipedia, says one student, or I Google something, and, well, why? Well, I used to read. But it doesn't take very long to put a little information that fires the imagination to the composer's world. It is increasingly shocking. But I had a boy in Aspen last summer, 17-year-old from mainland China, first time in the United States. And a student was playing the Revolutionary Etude. He wanted to, it was loud, it was virtuosic, it was way off anything like a Chopin expression of what, he didn't name it that, but it was not right. So I began to talk a little bit about, here is a composer who was homesick for his country, and he was expressing something that he could express with music as a patriotic soul of Poland. I said, there's a painting by Delacroix, who was a great friend of Chopin, Freedom. So this boy from China, he gives her the name of Delacroix, the name of the painting, and he knows all about it. He was the only one in that group that knew. Now that's interesting to me. And immediately there's a transformation. My favorite story is of an 8-year-old boy who played which etude of Chopin like he hated the world. And he was too young to. So I asked him, where were you born? I was born in Korea. How long have you lived here? Most of my life. I said, do you like this country? He said, no, I don't like it. I said, well, okay, you like Korea. Yes, I do. Do you ever sing your national anthem? Yes, I do. Can you sing a little bit of it? So this was just coming to me because it was so, I didn't know what to do. There wasn't time to do too much. He sang a little bit of it. I said, you know, it's just like Chopin. He could have sung his national anthem, but this way he wrote it the way he felt. So can you pretend now to play this piece like it's your national anthem? Totally different. I mean, boy, it challenges us as teachers, but it's people work. And now we have global people work. That's tough. It's a tough. And the future, who knows? It's not like it was. The music business isn't like it was. Our role models are different. They're much younger. They haven't finished. It's confusing. Yeah. But it's not all over. There are pockets.
You had mentioned Muntz and the notion of the subtleties and the nuances and the emotional impact of those nuances.
Right.
And I think often those are being lost, you know, just the subtle gradations that can just make a phrase and be so powerful and expressive. Yes. And we're missing that sensitivity to the moment. Maybe it's because there's a lot of noise. I mean, there are a lot of reasons, but
huge.
But there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of volume in what we're faced with every day. Yes. And it's hard to listen to those minute gradations that mean so much.
Yes, but they bring Myra Hess's story is something, I think a lot of young people do not know this story of how she was during the war. She was getting a huge career, and then Hitler was going to invade her country, and she telegraphed her manager here and said, my place is in my country until this conflict comes to an end. I will not come anywhere to play until we know. And of course, the story being that she organized the concerts every day in the National Gallery, broadcast by the BBC, and there was something in her aura that had that serenity and humanity in it, and the inspiration to give music to her people. And it was packed, and the bombs fell through the ceiling, never stopped, these concerts, until the end of the conflict. And the Blitz went on. No stop. So of course she became Dame Myra Hess after this extraordinary. If we can just realize that's what music is for, it's another concept of a career. She was willing to sacrifice the whole thing to help her people. And what she did was raise the morale and have them come in the middle of the danger, no matter what, for the music. So these are stories that we can tell. But I had my debut in Mexico a few hours after a huge earthquake. And my parents were with me, thank heaven, because I didn't know, there's not going to be a concert. Oh, yes, they said, we'll walk to the hall. And the hall had its own power plant. And everybody was there, plus 1,000 people, to hear the music in a day of tragedy. So, of course, I was very young, and I think I didn't put all that together. But I'm very grateful that that was the beginning of my professional life, was a crisis.
It was an earthquake.
Was a crisis, yeah. So this is a privilege to be here where everything seems together. It's all together in a beautiful way.
We appreciate having you here. And it's been a real pleasure to hear you talk about aspects of your life and teaching and performance.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us.